In the late 17th century, in a small, forgotten village nestled deep within the dark forests of Eastern Europe, a blacksmith named Viktor Petrov was renowned for his skill in crafting weapons, tools, and household items. Yet, Viktor harbored a sinister secret. He was a practitioner of the dark arts, a man obsessed with power and control. Viktor's most prized creation was a mirror, forged not from mere metal and glass, but from the essence of darkness itself. Legend had it that Viktor had made a pact with an ancient demon, offering his soul in exchange for the ability to trap the souls of others. With this power, Viktor crafted the mirror, a beautiful yet malevolent object designed to capture the souls of those who gazed into it with wickedness in their hearts. The mirror was framed in black and silver, adorned with intricate carvings of twisted faces and demonic symbols. Its surface, though polished to perfection, had an unsettling depth, as if it could draw you into another realm. Viktor used the mirror to claim the souls of many, but as his greed grew, so did the mirror's hunger. Eventually, the demon came to claim Viktor's soul, trapping him inside the very object he had created. The mirror, now cursed, was hidden away, passed down through generations, its dark power lying dormant until it was discovered again. In the present day, John and Emily Foster were a young couple in their early 30s, full of life and excitement as they moved into their new home, a charming old Victorian house in a quiet, suburban neighborhood. The house had been a steal, sold at a price far below market value, and they couldn't believe their luck. It was everything they had ever wanted, spacious, filled with character, and with just the right amount of old-world charm. As they explored the house, they discovered an attic filled with forgotten relics from the past owners. Dusty trunks, old furniture, and various knickknacks cluttered the space, but what caught Emily's eye was an old, ornate mirror tucked away in a corner, partially covered by a moth-eaten cloth. The mirror was beautiful, albeit unsettling. The frame was black and silver, intricately carved with strange symbols and faces that seemed to stare back at her. "John, look at this!" Emily called out. John climbed the ladder to the attic and joined her. "Wow, that's a piece of work," he said, brushing off some of the dust. "It must be an antique. Should we keep it?" Emily hesitated for a moment, feeling a strange unease as she stared into the mirror's depths. "Yeah, I think it would look great in the living room," she finally said, pushing aside her discomfort. They carried the mirror downstairs and hung it above the fireplace in the living room. It seemed to fit perfectly, adding a touch of old-world elegance to the room. That night, as they settled into their new home, the mirror hung silently on the wall, its dark surface reflecting the flickering flames of the fire. But deep within the glass, something stirred, something ancient and malevolent. The days passed, and life in the new house was blissful. John and Emily were settling in well, enjoying their newfound space and making the house their own. But as the days turned into weeks, Emily began to notice something strange. Every time she walked past the mirror, she felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't just the cold drafts that sometimes swept through the old house. It was something else, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. One evening, as she was getting ready for bed, Emily caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. But something was off. Her reflection was there, but her face looked wrong. It was twisted, her eyes darkened, her mouth curled into a cruel, unnatural smile. Emily gasped and turned away, but when she looked back, her reflection was normal. "John?" she called out, her voice trembling. John came into the room, concerned. "What's wrong?" Emily hesitated, unsure of how to explain what she had seen. I think I'm just tired. I thought I saw something in the mirror, but it was nothing." John looked at her with a raised eyebrow. "Are you sure? Maybe it's just the stress of the move." "Yeah, maybe," Emily said, forcing a smile. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just stress. There was something wrong with that mirror, something she couldn't quite explain. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences continued. Emily began to have nightmares, horrible, vivid nightmares of being trapped in a dark, cold place, surrounded by twisted faces that whispered in voices she couldn't understand. She would wake up in a cold sweat, her heart racing, but every time she looked at the mirror, it seemed to watch her, its surface dark and ominous. As the weeks went by, the atmosphere in the house began to change. The once warm and inviting home started to feel oppressive, as if the walls were closing in on them. John, who had initially dismissed Emily's concerns, began to experience strange things himself. One evening, as he was watching TV, John glanced at the mirror and saw a shadowy figure standing behind him. He whipped around, but there was no one there. The room was empty. He looked back at the mirror, but the figure was gone. "Emily, did you see that?" he asked, his voice tight with fear. "See what?" Emily replied, coming into the room. "There was someone behind me, in the mirror," John said, his eyes wide. Emily looked at him, her face pale. "I've been seeing things too," she whispered. "I think there's something wrong with that mirror." John didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was mounting. The whispering voices, the fleeting shadows, the nightmares, they were all connected to the mirror. But what could they do? It was just a mirror, wasn't it? That night, the house came alive with the sounds of footsteps echoing through the halls, doors creaking open and slamming shut on their own, and the unmistakable feeling of being watched. John and Emily huddled together in bed, their fear growing with each passing moment. The mirror, now fully awakened, began to exert its influence over the house. Its hunger for souls grew stronger, and it reveled in the fear it was causing. The once beautiful reflection was now a portal to something dark and twisted, a gateway to the realm of the damned. Emily couldn't take it anymore. The mirror's presence was consuming her, invading her thoughts, her dreams, and her waking life. She felt drawn to it as if it had some kind of power over her. She would find herself standing in front of it, staring into its depths, unable to look away. It was as if the mirror was calling to her, beckoning her to come closer, to step inside. She began to research the mirror's history, desperate to find some explanation for the horrors they were experiencing. She spent hours in the library, poring over old books and records, trying to uncover the truth. It was then that she stumbled upon the legend of Viktor Petrov, the cursed blacksmith. The story sent shivers down her spine as she read about the pact with the demon, the souls trapped within the mirror, and the blacksmith's ultimate demise. The mirror was cursed. There was no doubt about it. But what could she do? She returned home with a sense of dread, knowing that the mirror was more dangerous than she had ever imagined. It wasn't just a haunted object. It was a malevolent force, a living entity that fed on the souls of the innocent. When she told John what she had discovered, he was horrified. "We have to get rid of it," he said, his voice trembling. "We have to destroy it." "But how?" Emily asked, fear gripping her heart. "What if it's impossible?" "We have to try," John insisted. "We can't let this thing destroy us." As the days passed, the mirror's power grew stronger. The house was no longer a safe haven. It was a prison, a place where they were constantly watched, constantly tormented. The mirror seemed to have a will of its own, drawing them closer, feeding off their fear and despair. Emily's obsession with the mirror deepened. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think of anything else. The mirror was always there, in the back of her mind, calling to her. She began to hear voices, whispers that seemed to come from within the glass itself. "Help me," the voices would say. "Release me." But who were these voices? Were they the souls trapped within the mirror, or were they something else, something darker? One night, Emily was standing in front of the mirror, her hand hovering just inches from the surface. The voices were louder now, more insistent. "Come to us," they said. "Join us." She felt a pull, a physical force drawing her towards the mirror. Her reflection smiled at her, but it wasn't her smile. It was something cruel, something evil. She could feel the mirror's hunger, its desire to consume her, to pull her into its dark depths. But before she could touch the glass, John grabbed her and pulled her away. "What are you doing?" he shouted, shaking her. I don't know," Emily stammered, her mind clouded with confusion. "It's the mirror. It's trying to take me." "We have to destroy it," John said, his voice filled with urgency. "Now, before it's too late." Desperate to rid themselves of the cursed mirror, John and Emily decided to take drastic action. They would destroy the mirror once and for all, no matter the cost. But the mirror would not go down without a fight. They gathered every tool they could find, hammers, crowbars, even a sledgehammer, and prepared to shatter the glass. But as they stood before the mirror, ready to strike, the air in the room grew cold and the lights flickered. The mirror's surface began to ripple, like water disturbed by a stone, and the faces of the damned appeared, their eyes wide with fear, their mouths open in silent screams. "Do it!" John shouted, raising the sledgehammer. But before he could bring it down, the mirror exploded with a force that sent them both flying across the room. The glass shattered into a million pieces, but instead of falling to the floor, the shards hovered in the air, swirling around them like a storm of razor-sharp blades. The room was filled with a deafening roar, the voices of the trapped souls screaming in unison. The shards of glass began to close in on them, slicing through the air with deadly precision. "Emily, get out!" John screamed, pushing her towards the door. But the door slammed shut on its own, trapping them inside. The mirror, now a swirling vortex of darkness and glass, began to pull them towards it, its hunger insatiable. Emily could feel the force dragging her towards the center of the vortex, her body being pulled apart by the sheer power of the mirror's curse. She reached out to John, but he was too far away, already being consumed by the darkness. "John!" she screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the roar of the vortex. In a final, desperate attempt to save them, Emily grabbed one of the shards of glass and plunged it into the center of the vortex. There was a blinding flash of light, and the room was suddenly silent. When Emily opened her eyes, she was lying on the floor, the room bathed in an eerie, unnatural light. The mirror was gone, its shards scattered across the floor, but the darkness remained. The house was no longer their home. It was a tomb, a place where the cursed souls of the damned would remain forever. Emily and John never spoke of what happened that night. They moved out of the house the next day, leaving everything behind, including the shattered remains of the mirror. But the curse was not broken. It never could be. The mirror's power lived on, waiting for the next victim to fall into its trap. As they drove away from the house, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. There, in the reflection, was the twisted, malevolent face of Viktor Petrov, smiling back at her. The curse had followed them. The mirror was gone, but its darkness remained, and it would never let them go. And so, the cursed mirror waits, hidden away in the shadows, biding its time until it can claim its next victim. For those who dare to look into its depths, there is no escape. The mirror will take you, just as it has taken so many before, and your soul will be trapped within its glass forever. So, beware of the cursed mirror, for its hunger knows no bounds, and it will stop at nothing to claim you. And when it does, you will become just another face in the glass, another soul lost to the darkness, another victim of the cursed mirror.